Good evening. I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Round Lake Area 116 Board of Education public hearing for the 2022 tax levy. If I can get started, let me get a roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley?
Here.
Mr. Francisco?
Here.
Mr. Tavera?
Here.
Miss Lee?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Mr. Jewett?
Here.
Mrs. Klingler?
Here.
All right, and I will turn it over to Dr. Kivens with the final 2022 tax levy.
Good evening, Board of Education. Tonight we are presenting the 2022 levy presentation, Required Truth and Taxation Hearing. Illinois Property Tax Code states that all taxing districts must estimate their property taxes to be levied at least 20 days before the adoption of its aggregate levy. Published in a newspaper of general local circulation, a notice of proposed increase no more than 14 days nor less than 7 days prior to the date of the public hearing on all proposed increase in the aggregate levy of more than 105% of its prior year extension, and file that levy with the county clerk before the last Tuesday in December. As we look at additional requirements that we have for this Truth and Taxation hearing, a new House Bill 2412 Minority Publication Notice Act signed into law by Governor Pritzker August 27, 2021 requires the additional posting of notices in a local newspaper where the city, town, or county consists of more than 45% of a single minority. The notice shall be published in a local newspaper of that minority group and in the language of that minority group. House Bill 2412 has indicated that Round Lake Beach has met that requirement, and as a result, we have accommodated those requests. Lake County News Sun public hearing notice was posted in the required time on December 7th, 2022. In addition, per House Bill 2412, Pearl football newspaper hearing was also published on December 7th as well in the language of Spanish as required by House Bill 2412. In addition, a new cash reserve balance disclosure is required not only at the levy hearing, but also as we approve our budgets for the fall. That's in compliance with Section 17-1.3 of the Illinois School Code, and we have published, as we have our treasurer's report, we've provided for you our cash balance disclosures. So when we look at our operating funds, which are our general fund and our special revenue funds, you will see across the board all total governmental funds are a total liabilities and fund balance of $62,345,168 as a total. The subdivided lines of fund balance, $42,264,748 is our education fund, which is our largest fund, and then you see the remaining fund balances along the right side of the page. As we look at the proposed certificate of tax levy that I'm bringing for final board approval this evening, you will see a total tax levy amount of $29,757,428. The funds that are representing that are as follows: $11,782,455 for the Ed Fund, which is Fund 10. Operation and Maintenance, $3,750,536, which is Fund 20. Transportation Fund, $5,260,149, Fund 40. Working Cash, $247,231. Municipal Retirement, $2,104,058. Social Security, $2,104,058. That is our Fund 50. Fire Prevention and Safety, $300,000, Fund 90. Tort and Immunity, $1,578,048, which is Fund 80. Special Education falls within our Fund 10, that is $2,104,059, and leasing is $500,000. We are also bound by our requirements of supporting our partner at the CEDAW IRMF education facility, and that bond is $26,834 for a total of $29,757,428. So as we look at our requirements for the Truth and Taxation, that proposed capped tax levy of $29,735,094 is an increase of $1,444,964.50. That is 5.10. The limits for truth and taxation would be anything above 5%. Our final capped extension for last year, which would have been 2021 levy, was $28,285,629.54. Also, as we look at the property tax code, just want to be very clear, not only to you as a Board of Education, but also to our community of transparency of meeting these requirements. Truth and taxation notice of public hearing was needed to be published between 7 and 14 days before the hearing of this evening to adopt the levy. Lake County News Sun and Pro Football both published on December 7th, 2022. Notification should be printed in a newspaper of general circulation published in the district. Lake County News Sun and Pro Football are both published within the district. The notice may not appear in a part of the newspaper where legal notices and classifieds appear. Page 6 and page 13 respectively are not legal notices or classified ad sections. As we look at next steps, not only for you as a Board of Education, but for our community, we are recommending approval of this levy this evening. The next step would be going to the county clerk's office to have this filed. I have the two areas highlighted not only for your view, but also for that of our community. As we look at an overall aerial view of our community, we have listed, and these numbers have not changed, we have in our community in terms of parcel count for property taxes, 12,996. Again, the contributing factors of why that might have been adjusted from previous years are property identification adjustment numbers. If people have had lots next door to their homes and they've put it under one PIN number for ease of tax paying purposes, or if there's been a status change from tax exempt. And then also we are in a very confident, firm position of our financial profile history at a 3.70, which is 0.10 higher than our prior fiscal year. And I'm happy to entertain any questions that the board or community may have at this time.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none, members of the public may participate in public comment during regular and this special board meeting by attending in person or by submitting electronic public comment forms. Please note that in all instances, speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Electronic public comments were accepted up until noon of today. We did not receive any electronic public comments. Do we have any local public comments in regards to the levy? Hearing none there, we will call this meeting adjourned at 7:04 p.m. And then we will quickly move into the next meeting. All right, and I would like to call to order this regular meeting of the Round Lake Area School District Board of Education, 116 on 12/19/2022 at 7:04 p.m. If I can get started with a roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley?
Here.
Mr. Francisco?
Here.
Mr. De Vera?
Here.
Miss Lee?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Mr. Jewett?
Here.
Mrs. Klingler?
Here.
Next up is our Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first up is approval of our meeting agenda. We have an agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Mrs. Larson. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mr. De Vera?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Motion carries. We have an approved agenda, and first up on that are special recognition and presentations, and we have our November Athletes of the Month.
Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure and privilege to present our November Athletes of the Month, both from our wrestling program. Senior Vianney Hernandez and Junior Alejandro Cordova. With us tonight to tell you a little bit more about them is one of our assistant wrestling coaches, Mr. Noah Schusteff.
It's really an honor and a privilege to be here to recognize both these guys, Alejandro and Vianney. Vianney's been a trailblazer ever since she started wrestling in middle school. I believe at Round Lake Middle School, she was one of, if not the only girl in their program. And coming to the high school then, as a freshman, still the only girl in the program. She's been a fantastic leader for all the girls who have come up. One of the hardest workers in the room. Some of her most recent accolades, she took first place in Niles West girls wrestling tournament. It was the inaugural Niles West girls wrestling tournament. It was a very difficult bracket. And then more recently, she took third place at the Larkin High School girls wrestling tournament, which was significantly more difficult of a tournament, much larger bracket, more schools. And the only loss Vianney suffered was to a girl who's ranked in the top 3 of the state. One of the greatest things about Vianney is we always know that when she goes out on the mat, her opponent's in for a fight. Vianney has I want to call it a habit, but it's a skill where she's very difficult to pin. To the point where in her final match at Niles West, she found herself in a situation where she had to fight off her back for about a minute and a half of the first period. Did so, and then came back in the second period and pinned her opponent in about 15 seconds. So definitely a leader of our girls' team. All the young girls look up to her. She's absolutely a coach's dream. So congratulations to Vianney. All right. Our next recipient, Alejandro Cordova. This one feels really special to me because for those of you who don't know, I've had the pleasure to coach Alejandro ever since he was a 6th grader at McGee. And since then, one thing that stuck out as apparent to anybody who saw him wrestle was he was an absolutely elite competitor, an elite athlete. And over the years, he has turned himself into an elite wrestler. And to see the growth and improvement from year to year is astounding. The level of wrestler Alejandro is as a junior is usually the type of wrestler where we hear about they started when they were 6 years old. And Alejandro started not at 6 years old, but in 6th grade, never having wrestled before. Which is a testament to his character, a testament to his dedication to the sport. And it's really cool seeing from year to year, there's always another wrinkle he's added to his arsenal, whether it's another move series or something that he used to have trouble with that he would fix. Very, very coachable, very willing to improve. As far as this season so far, he's been as dominant as expected. The Conant duel absolutely dominated his opponent to I believe it was a technical fall. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Technical fall, for those you don't know, is beating your opponent by 15 points or more. It's not easy to do. The Conant tournament, he finished second place, losing only to a returning state champion. On his way to the finals there, he had 2 more technical falls and a pin. One of those technical falls was against a ranked opponent, and the fall was against an all-state opponent. And he has continued to show that elite level of wrestling. At the McMorrow Mudge tournament at Prospect recently, where he took 3rd place, and that has turned into probably one of the more difficult tournaments in the state. He's always representing Round Lake High School, Round Lake Wrestling, his family. It's just the best way possible. Couldn't be happier to be have him associated with our program and to have been involved with him and his family for as long as I have. So congratulations, Alejandro.
All right, next up is another great presentation, Round Lake Exchange Club Youth of the Month. Take it away, Mr. Pearson.
All right, good evening, everybody. So I'm going to introduce Anthony Sementa as our Youth of the Month. So this one's really special to me. Anthony was one of the first students I met from Round Lake High School. Anthony was on the interview team for principal. Leaving that meeting, it was very impressive to watch the way he carried himself in that meeting. And actually, we had some pretty open discussion in that interview process, and I was really impressed. But I got to see him walk through the halls here, and I got to watch him carry himself in sports, and I've got to see him in the classroom, and I would say that he is the epitome of what Panther Pride really is. So I'm going to run through kind of some of his honors, but there's something that I recently saw in a classroom that kind of blew my mind and really solidified who he is as a leader. So right now he's carrying out 4.3 GPA, has taken a course load of 11 honors classes, 6 AP classes during his 4 years while a student here. He's currently working on his 12th season of competing in athletics here. 3 sports for 4 years. Amazing in a time of specialization in sports. He is always active in our sports. A member of our cross-country team, he was a captain. He won the NLCC Sportsmanship Award and our Panther Pride Discipline Award for cross-country. On top of that, over the course of 4 years, he's been in both our band and choir program. He was a member of our Panther crew, which really focuses on making freshmen feel at home at Round Lake High School. Member of National Honor Society. And then in his spare time, right, he is involved in multiple just community service projects all throughout, not just the community around Lake, but Lake County as a whole. But I said that there was something that really impressed me about him. And the other day, he's a member or in our community civics honors class, and many of you have got a chance to see that and see what that's about. He's taken an active role in that. But I got to see one of his presentations, and the thing that really impressed me was that one of his group members wasn't present for that presentation. And when they looked around to see who's taking that part, without hesitation, Anthony just stepped up and took over that part, where I think a lot of kids may have just passed the buck and said, well, they're not here, we're going to skip this. At no point did he even hesitate. Stepped up, gave the presentation, knew all the information for everything going on there, and it says who he is and his level of involvement and the leader that he is. So today I want to present to you Anthony Sementa.
Oh, I have to hold the button? Oh, man.
It's
I know it's going to be a challenge. All right, well, I have a speech for you guys, so you guys can get to know me a little bit more, and I had to write this speech answering the question on someone who means a lot to me in my personal life and has inspired me to be the person I am today. People can plan out their whole lives. You know, they can have a lucrative career, get a good job, start a family, settle down, buy a house, and so on. But there's something you can never plan for, and that's a child with disabilities. My cousin Thomas has autism, and it's something my aunt and uncle never prepared for. My uncle is here actually today, and I've seen the toll it's taken on them and the toll it's taken on their lives in general. When I was a young kid and when Thomas was born, I didn't think anything of it. He is a twin, and he was always kind of like, wasn't very active, was kind of just by himself, didn't really do much, and his twin is very hyper, very active, and I always played around with his twin and hung out with him and kind of, did stuff with him, and I was just thought he was shy. And it wasn't until a late night drive home one night where my dad, I heard him mention the word autism for the very first time. And I was tired, I was like sleep deprived, we just left our uncle's house, and I didn't think anything of it. And then when I got older and I asked my uncle what did autism mean and what the word meant, he explained it to me, and after that conversation, I decided to learn more about it because I was still very confused. I was still pretty young. And after researching it for, I think, about an hour, I could not tell you what I learned because autism is, the spectrum is so big and wide. It's not the same for every single kid with autism. It's always unique. And when I realized what the word meant, it kind of hit me like a tank and I couldn't process it. I also couldn't process at that point that it was something that they didn't plan for, that it was something that life kind of threw them, and they're phenomenal people, and Tommy's phenomenal, Alex is phenomenal, but Tommy has to live with autism for the rest of his life, disrupting every second of every day. And as I got older, taking and hanging out with both of them, Thomas, and watching him face his challenges, something kind of clicked for me. Thomas is me. I was also a twin. We were both born prematurely, and we were both born with a condition at birth. For me, it was a coronal artesia. It's a condition, and I had to go through chemotherapy and multiple surgeries because it was causing a lack of oxygen to my brain. And after all of that, and after all my surgeries, which were successful, I had to go through numerous speech therapy to fix how I spoke and everything else, and to relearn how to speak and to be able to carry myself. And even right now, as I'm speaking, it's still kind of hard for me. Like sometimes I still trip over my words. I still have a stutter and stammer in certain areas, and I have a little bit of a lisp. I can't say the word figure correctly. And watching Thomas kind of reminds me of myself because I don't remember the trauma I went through. But watching him reminds me that, I face those challenges too, and watching him face his challenges every single day reminds me whenever I'm feeling down and feel like I can't push on, can't keep going, that I can. Because if he can push through his challenges with the memory of it and can keep going through everything every second of the day and keep pushing forward, I can too. And he's truly inspired me to face every obstacle. Face every obstacle without any hesitation and to just go for it. Because just because you're different doesn't mean you can't do something that others can. And he has truly become my inspiration.
All right, next up, we'll start with communications to the board, and we don't even have to have Dr. Mendoza wish everybody out of the room. They're already gone. First up, CEDAW Governing Board recap. Ms. Larson?
Okay, we met December 7th. It was a very long meeting. There is a new contract with the Seattle Teacher Union, 3-year contract. There is a couple memorandum of understandings with the teachers union and support staff. They had a little extra ESSER money, so they decided to do a little attendance bonus for them for January through March, which is kind of cool. Their enrollment and staffing, they went through a whole bunch of info for us. Starting in August, they had openings for 6 teachers and 76 paras. As of November, they are down to only needing 3 teachers and 16 paras. So, you know, everyone was getting hit hard this year. So, they are working on a tuition reset committee because, you know, it's that time of year again. They have been having member district meetings and surveys. All the districts that participate came and discussed the history and programming. Out of that, a lot of information came out. Currently, there's 31 member districts. 100% of the districts use their building-based programs like Laremont. 88.9% of the districts use their sector programs. 87% of districts use their audio, visual, and hearing services. 70% of districts are using their itinerant services. So that's like occupational therapy, physical therapists. I'm sorry, I'm speaking like special ed language here, which I totally know, but you guys might not. 64% are using building-based programs, and 44% of the buildings are using their professional development, which has kind of changed a lot. That would be like CPI training and stuff like that. They've had 5 more districts take back some of their own programming into the community, and they are helping support that. The Seattle admin team and the executive board is doing a book study and goal setting using the Trust Edge experience, which I know a lot of us have seen and possibly gone to down in Chicago at the Tri-I. And our own Dr. Mendoza has been a part of it because he is a part of their executive board. So lots going on over there.
Questions from the board?
Is there anything we need to be concerned of?
Not right now that they've mentioned. They're working on redoing their big plan, and working with their member districts and working with this, doing the Trust Edge experience to try and realign what's going on. The superintendent's been there a few years, but her first year in, she walked into a Titanic situation, and then COVID hit. So this is her first real year of actually getting to do things. So they're righting the ship and figuring out where everything is going from here.
Hearing nothing else, thank you. Next up, we will go to fiscal 23 budget assumptions. Dr. Gibbons.
Okay, so this is our mid-year update of where we are financially and fiscally after we've started our school year and really engaged back into our Return to Learn program. As we look at the overall modifications to the spreadsheet, there are 4 areas that the Board of Education has seen prior. Just a small caveat, there is one area that will be on the agenda this evening for approval. That's the community engagement position. That is not reflected in this document, but will be certainly reflected in the next budget assumption update. So as we look at the first area that's reflected, that is number 8, investment income. Although not good for the consumer, very good for us as a public entity with our investments, an opportunity to make our money work for us. So that dollar amount has been adjusted, and I do anticipate that dollar amount to move again in the positive direction for us as a district. Also looking at line 57, 2.0 coaching stipends. Those are the stipends that are for the high school boys IHSA volleyball. Also line 58, 1.0 elementary PE teacher. to be shared between Plebiac, Murphy, and Beach. And then also the substitute rate increase, which has been a positive move in the direction for the district and our fill rates. With all of those adjustments, we're still in a very firm financial fiscal position of $2,041,558 at this point.
I just want to highlight and thank the board. The substitute rate increase is working. Like, it had an immediate effect within a week. Our fill rate went from 50% to over almost 85% in 1 week. So now the downside is the word on the street is out there from the other districts, because I'm getting calls from superintendents about our sub rates, but it's working. I even talked to the principals for the first time, probably in 3 years. They're having positions filled in advance. And so I just really want to thank the board for doing that, because yes, there's an increase in the cost, but how do you put a cost on the burden it's putting on the teacher? So thank you.
I was just going to add, of course, this was reviewed at Finance earlier this evening, and as Dr. Kibbins already spoke to, just the positions are missing that are on the board for approval later this evening. But again, this is also a working living document, so we probably will see some changes when it comes, again, after the new year.
Hearing no other questions, thank you very much. Student achievement presentation.
So just real quick, Kurt is going to be doing going through the slides. Just a little bit of background. Ms. Lee, you're a little bit new on the board, but this kind of presentation is prior to COVID is customary. So I think moving forward, you will be seeing these in the kind of late fall, early winter. But just wanted to kind of provide the context. If you really think about it, it's the first time in 3.5 years where we've had some level of cogent, consistent, operations in the district. 1920, school shut down in March. The IAR was canceled. The MAP testing window was done. 2021, specifically, our kids were out until March. We ran a hybrid program. They came back. But I think we probably had 25% of our kids, because if you remember, we gave parents the choice. And then last year, frankly, we were getting used to being back. If you remember, we had, I think, my memory's correct, masks on and very strict isolation protocols. You're going to see some of that in the attendance rates. But there's definitely some strengths, opportunities. What I asked Dr. Rolling not to do was literally to plow through every single slide in detail, because there's over 50 slides. But what we tried to do is put executive summaries in there. He's going to highlight the important points, but this is really going to drive the work that we do. So again, what I would expect with Dr. Center, the team, the principals, is every year, again, like we used to do in the fall, you're going to see student achievement. And frankly, one of the things that I like, we tried a little bit different format. We want to track cohorts of kids over time, and we color coded those for you. So really, obviously, we want to answer your questions tonight, but also interested in the format. If there's something you want to see different, certainly we're open to that. So I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Roaming.
All right. Good evening. As Dr. Mendoza says, as we go through, I will not go through every slide in depth for I'm sure we all want to get home. But also, we're really looking at trends and looking over the last couple of years. Obviously, there will be some holes in the data, and I will point out some other points that make the data maybe a little less reliable than we would prefer. I also want to point out, she's not here this evening, but Eileen Erisman, who's our data specialist, helped with this. She did a lot of work, and as we hit the end, I'm really proud of the work she did in relation to the school report card. So let's go ahead and get started. We will be covering this evening some running records data, some NWEA MAP data, some IAR, SAT. I know there's a lot of letters for everybody, but don't worry, I'll tell you what it means. Chronic absenteeism and some other success indicators And then we will follow up again with answering some of the questions that the board posed when we talked about school accountability about a month ago. So Running Records is a local reading assessment that we give in the fall, winter, and spring to students in grades K2 to assess their reading fluency. We've presented some of this data previously. As we get started, a couple of takeaways. We'll go through a couple slides. You'll notice that the number of students recorded as non-readers consistently gets lower over time. So we're moving students from being non-readers, very basic readers, into much more grade level appropriate reading skills. The number of readers that are at or above grade level has generally risen the longer that we have the students in our schools. And you will see students are recovering from a COVID slump. Being out of school is obviously a challenge for a lot of our students. So this first slide, and these colors never quite look right when I'm standing over here. They look different on my computer. But again, just as you look all the way to the left, that identifies where our students are in the winter of their kindergarten year. And as you go down, that represents different cohorts. And so you can see as we move across the tables, minus a couple of missing data points during those COVID times, highlighted in the light blue, you can see that the number of non-readers drops significantly as the students age. In the next slide, you can see this identifies where the students are. Again, this is cohort data moving across the table as they get closer to grade level. So the number representing the students that are near or at grade level reading according to the running records. So again, this is local data. The bigger the number, the better on this chart. And we're really proud of the work that our teachers do with our youngest readers. And then this is just a recap. We've already covered this, but it's just kind of a reminder as you go through of the things, kind of our takeaways. Moving into NWEA map. So this is an interim assessment that we give in the fall, winter, and spring. It is nationally normed. And so it's taken by millions of students around the country. It tests our students both in reading and math. As we look at our MAP scores, you will see that student achievement is rising as we come back from the pandemic. You will see a dip in many of the grade levels during the 2021 year. We also believe that you're going to see a rise in our student achievement as it gets closer to the national norm in grades 6 through 10. It's important to note, we talk about mastery learning and some of our standards-based practices. That's been implemented at the secondary level much longer than at the elementary. The elementary launched their standards-based curriculum in the 18-19 school year. And as you may have noticed, there have been some obstacles in the way since then. And so they're not as far along. Additionally, and Dr. Mendoza mentioned this, even when we got our students back, much of the work that really moves the needle, especially with our youngest learners, in terms of reading and math, happens in the small group setting. And when we first brought students back, we had a lot of strict COVID restrictions, so we weren't able to get kids into some of those smaller groups, some of those more dynamic learning activities. So those are some of our large-scale takeaways.
And if you remember, we actually purchased furniture so that they were separated. The board supported that purchase.
All right, so we're going to go through a couple of slides, and as you look at these slides, you'll see the numbers have different colors as they kind of move diagonally across the table. That represents a cohort. So if you follow, for example, that first box all the way to the left where it says K, SY20, that's the number of students that were at the reading at the 50th percentile or higher in the fall. And then as you go across it to the third line, you'll see the same color, 23. So obviously that's a case where we had, that's our COVID slump right there. But as you watch those numbers, especially as they move from SY22 down to SY23, which is this fall, you will see some significant growth, especially in some of our older groups. So there are groups that aren't growing as fast, and there are a couple that do drop, but note that the 50th percentile moves as they move up. So that number that they have to achieve does get a little higher. This represents our math numbers, similar pattern as you look down, especially noting the drop from SY20 to SY22 in a lot of cases, but then some improvement as we move into this fall. This chart represents the percent of students that are meeting their fall to winter growth metric. So when a student takes a test in the fall, MAP says they should grow to a certain percentage. And so this is the number of students that are meeting that growth pattern. We just closed the window for our MAP testing on Friday. So we do not have this year's data yet. We will start analyzing that probably later this week or during the break when we have a little time to breathe. But again, as you look across, you will see that we are near that 50% mark in a lot of areas, and that is essentially that's good. About 50% of the students should reach that growth pattern, and then we'll see a similar mark. In fact, some of our growth with our oldest students is pretty high. A series of numbers over 50%, so that represents scoring a little bit higher than the national average on growth. And then a RIT score, that's the raw number behind the percentage. So as students get older, that number obviously grows. That bottom chart there in the green, which is actually really hard to read from here, but that represents the national norm. And so if you look at our group, if you kind of look down the chart, right, our kindergartners over time, first graders over time, you'll see that while we do fall a little bit behind the national average through some of those elementary years, generally by the time our students get into 7th, 8th, 9th grade, they are getting back to, if not even with, the national norms. And then we actually see a fairly similar mark in the math category. So again, while our students fall a little bit behind, we are catching them up. The longer they're with us, the better they're doing. And so again, these are our MAP assessment takeaways. We really look forward to, as our elementary schools really get a little more comfortable and get more established with our mastery learning and standards-based grading practices, we anticipate that we will see the same kind of growth that we currently see in our secondary schools. Moving into the IAR. So this is the state mandated test that we give every spring to students in grades 3 through 8. It measures reading and math. This is the number that really matters when we start talking about school report cards. This is our achievement and our growth number. There is no IAR data in 2020. We went out right before the IAR window. It's important to note, and this is something that's come up repeatedly as we do data analysis with other schools in the state, the Illinois standard is pretty high. The Illinois standard represents approximately a 70th percentile on the map, meaning to meet standards in Illinois, you have to be reading at a level higher than 70 out of every 100 students. So as we look at the charts, you'll see a section called Approaching Standards. That means the student is considered at or near grade level. Remember that 50th percentile is generally considered right around grade level. The other thing you'll see as we look at the charts, the comparison between the 2021 data and the 2022 data is very difficult. We had a pretty low percentage of students take these exams. We were in the high 30s for both reading and math. And so you have a much different group. Now, that's not to say it's better or worse, but that comparison can be challenging. And then, right below that, you'll see, last spring we had nearly 100% of students taking those exams. So, and then the last thing that we have as a takeaway, and it's not really represented in the charts here, but when you dig through some of the data, our achievement gap for both ELA and math is much smaller than the achievement gaps around the state. Meaning when you compare our all to our subgroups, there is not as big of a gap as you would see in a lot of other school districts. So that's a point of pride for us. Some of our cohorts improved performance from 21 to 22, but again, that comparison is very difficult because of the percentage of students taking the test. This is kind of a nationwide trend that the pandemic seems to have a smaller impact on reading than it did on math. And I think a lot of that we believe is cultural. You know, we read to our kids. Reading is kind of ingrained in our society. It's part of what we do every day. I think there's a little more of a math phobia. It's not something people naturally do with their kids at night. They don't do, algebra, I guess. They don't do math problems. The kids want to read a book. And so you just see a lot more of that. And then a lot of the work that Dr. Steffen and her team are doing this year is working to provide additional supports to our students through a more robust MTSS process. That's how we identify students that are in need of multi-tiered systems of support. Just occurred to me I didn't actually tell you what that meant. I apologize. But really helping our students that are struggling to get caught up. And so that has been a big initiative this year. So the next couple slides will show a cohort. This grade 8 cohort is actually this year's freshmen. So this is their 8th grade data, 7th grade data, and then their 5th grade data. And if you look at really an easy way to measure growth is how big is that bottom chunk, right? Those are the students that are below standards. Now in 8th grade, we don't see as great of a pattern as we will, as we flip through, identify in 7th grade, significantly smaller from 21 to 22, and actually smaller than they were in 2019. So again, as we kind of go from cohort to cohort, you'll see some different patterns here. And then the 5th grade only has 2 numbers because they've only taken that in 3rd and 4th grade, and same thing here with the 4th graders. So that's our general math data. Again, we see some trends that are positive and some that we recognize we're going to need to really look at. And then as we get into ELA and reading, we can look for similar trends going year over year, looking to see how big that bottom blue is. The goal then, obviously, to get down to below pre-pandemic numbers and as many of our kids into those top columns as possible. So again, those are the IAR charts and our takeaways there. Moving into the SAT, I think this is one that people are more familiar with. This is also state mandated. It's always state mandated in 11th grade. Throughout the years, Illinois has funded the PSAT for 9th and 10th graders, but that has been inconsistent largely due to the pandemic. As we look at this, we do not really have cohort data on the SAT. So the charts for the SAT don't compare a group's growth across time. They are individual groups of students. Again, the Illinois standard for meeting standards is higher than the College Board, and we'll see that in the next couple of charts. And like our IAR numbers, our achievement gap numbers for the ELA and the math is significantly lower than the state average. So our takeaways here. Pandemic classes are performing below previous performance levels. So that's something that we're targeting. Mr. Peterson and his team have really looked to find the crosswalk between SAT skills and where they are in our curriculum, trying to ensure that we are preparing our kids not just for the test, but for college readiness. This chart demonstrates what I just talked about. So according to College Board, if you get a 480 on the reading test, you are college and career ready. About 59% of students statewide, or sorry, 59% of students nationwide will reach that mark. But if you go down, you'll see that Illinois considers college readiness a 540. Only about 38% of students nationwide reach that mark. So the Illinois standard versus the College Board standard is different. It's not as pronounced in math, where there's a 10-point differential, but it still exists. As we go into SAT attainment, this is a trend that we are addressing, we are looking at, but our students in ELA, we do see a number of students that are below standards. And again, in math, we see a similar trend. So again, Mr. Peterson and his leadership team are working with teachers to try to address these trends. Moving into chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism measures the number of students that have been absent for 10% or more of the school days per year. That number does change over time. 10% as we go throughout the year kind of evens itself out. Nationwide and statewide, we have seen an increase in chronic absenteeism. So our chronic absenteeism is higher than it has been in the past. You'll notice that the 2021 school year, our chronic absenteeism is significantly lower than the state average. And that's because during the pandemic, when we were out in remote learning, we did our attendance based on student engagement and demonstration of learning rather than seat time sitting in front of that screen. So we did have a higher percentage because we may have had students that didn't turn their cameras on. We may have had students that weren't always sitting in the class session, but they were turning in work. They were showing engagement. And we recognize that each kid may have had a different situation during those years and what they were dealing with at home. Dr. Apgar has been working with the principals as they address our absentee rates, and that's been a topic of conversation at principal meetings and AP meetings over the last couple of months. You can see our trend data versus the state. As a general rule, we are following the state. Last year we were in the low 30s. As of today, Dr. Apgar shared with me that we are currently district-wide 27.9% chronic absenteeism, but I think there's a real celebration here at Round Lake High School where we are at 19.4. So that is our chronic absentee rate here at the high school with our oldest students is lower than expected, and if the trend continues, would be lower than the state average. So that's a real point of celebration. Moving into a couple other success indicators, we don't like to measure our success solely based on the tests. I think our kids do a lot more than just their performance on one day. So in our advanced academic programming, students can take AP courses or dual credit. Students earning a 3 to 5 on the AP exams are eligible to receive college credit from institutions, especially those that are public. And then most of the dual credit numbers do so through Lake County Tech Campus. We are currently exploring more dual credit opportunities with College of Lake County for additional programming. These are just some historical numbers. It's important to note too, when you look at the number of AP exams taken, in 2019, the College Board changed the time frame for when students have to sign up for the AP exam. They used to have to sign up in March when they had a much better idea as to how they were actually doing in the class. Now students are required to sign up by October, and so they don't have as good of a handle on it. And so I think we're still, and schools around the country are still trying to kind of figure out how to help students navigate that. The test can run a fairly good amount of money, and so kids are making educated guesses and financial investments. But again, you can see we have a number of students taking AP classes, and we're helping our students. Last year, our students through AP earned 432 potential credits at the college level. And we had 119 students that were enrolled in dual credit.
I do want to call this out, and I've tried to do this when I was doing the achievement presentations. We don't necessarily feel like that AP number should be going up every single year, because what happens is there's a point where you're saturated, and if you keep offering more, you start seeing decreases in some of the other course offerings. So one class cannibalizes another. You look at the class that Mr. Barnshaw has this year, the Community Civics course, which is an honors course. If that class didn't exist, maybe some of those kids would have been in advanced placement courses. So I think just looking at the trend numbers, I mean, we were up a little bit higher, but honestly, I wouldn't expect to see a constant increase, because that's not what we support here. We want the AP classes offered for the kids that want to take them. Maybe some of the other kids don't want to take advanced placement, and maybe they have a different career path of their choosing. So I just want to say that that's not something we would, with a static enrollment, if you keep increasing classes, we're not going to run classes of 8 kids. We're just not going to do that. So just wanted to call that out. Did I miss anything on that, Dr. Rowling?
No. And like I said, if we're going to increase anything that you see on this chart, it would likely be in the area of dual credit, where our students have the opportunity to earn credit directly through CLC, which is where most of our college-bound students go. Just a couple of other highlights. The class of 2022 had 16 students earn Illinois State Scholar Honors. 34 earned the Illinois President's Education Award. And we had 23 students earn the Seal of Biliteracy, in addition to a number of students earning academic honors for their GPAs during their time here. So I think these represent a lot of the talents and efforts of our kids that may not be represented just solely on the SAT. Our graduation rate continues to be in the high 80s, and so that's something we're proud of. Ninth grade on track is an area that we have seen some struggles during the pandemic years. I will say, in fact, I was in Mr. Peterson's office right before this meeting, and if you walk around the school and if you look at the televisions around the school, you'll see there's a big focus on helping kids understand if they are on track. Not just freshmen, but sophomores, juniors, and seniors, identifying what it means to be on track and what you should do if you are not on track. And so that is a real focus this year at the high school with the leadership. The counseling department is working with all of our students that are behind. We have students behind, again, because of those pandemic years where we had some students that were struggling. And so that has been a focus, working with students, meeting with them, depending on how close they are to graduation, by anywhere from bi-weekly to monthly, to make sure that they recognize where they are and what they need to do to get across that finish line. And so again, just going through some of those takeaways, Dr. Apgar is working pretty diligently with our building admin on addressing absences, making sure our kids are here. We did talk about the change in the AP exam dates, and then talked a little bit about graduation rates remaining high. It's really hard to get much higher than the low 90s, just based on the way that they track it. In fact, as we get close, and I believe we talked about this a few years ago, the counselors here actually have a master sheet with the students that are in danger of not graduating. And if you look at the students that are highlighted in red, that have the most difficult situations, many of them are transfers. They've come to us as juniors with single-digit credits, and trying to get those kids across the finish line is a little more challenging. So most of the students that are with us, that stay with us, graduate with us. And then again, some of the work that the high school team here is doing on ninth grade on track. And so we'll wrap up here with some summative school designation. We did look at this data about a month and a half ago, so I'm not going to read all this to you again. one of the questions that was posed, and I'll stick with this just for a moment, but one of the questions that was posed was why, right? Why is it that this group was targeted? What were the data points that led to that? And you've already seen this chart, but when we get into the next charts, this is some of the work that Ms. Erisman has done. She essentially reverse engineered the state report card. Spent a couple of hours on the phone with ISB, which if you've ever had the pleasure of doing that, it's not as much fun as it sounds, and went and identified for each indicator at each school, and then for each subgroup, which areas fall below the threshold. So the threshold, as we talked previously, for elementary and middle schools is 31.55. So every one of those boxes that you see that is highlighted in yellow is where we had a scale score below 31.55. And then for the high school, it's 9.89. So this is kind of that micro targeting of these areas and trying to identify where it is that we need to focus our efforts. So this is the all group. This is all students at our different schools. So you can see that things like EL progress to proficiency, some of our ELA growth and math growth. Now that number is a little difficult because of the way the state did it this year. They actually tracked the number all the way back to 2019. And so having enough students in that population group was a challenge. But then as we go through, we'll look at some of our subgroups. Here we see our low income students. You can see certain things like chronic absenteeism is a problem. That's an area that we're going to target. As we look at our children with disabilities, you can see some areas in terms of proficiency and growth. As we get into our ethnic subgroups, where you see a lot of blacked out boxes, that means we don't have data points. That subgroup is too small in that school to be able to provide a score. But as we go through, you can see, again, looking for trends on those yellow boxes. And then, wrapping up with, it's really hard for me to see it from all the way over here. But I think that's our white subgroup. Thank you. I should have put my glasses on, I guess. Those charts represent that work that we're doing to get to the question of why. Now we've kind of identified why, and so for us the question is then what's next? How do we intervene? As we talked about some areas in terms of chronic absenteeism, some areas in terms of helping our students through our MTSS process, hoping that helps change some of those scores. And then getting into our language subgroups, where we have our EL and our former EL students. And I really think, if you think about that bottom box, the former EL, these are students that, were in EL services up until the last couple of years, and there's not a lot of yellow there. And so I think that really demonstrates the strength of our EL programming in preparing those kids for success. And so I threw a lot at you. What questions?
Just a couple things to button this up. I just want to call it a couple things on attendance. Just remember, the chronic absenteeism is not chronic truancy. It doesn't really matter why the students are gone. What we saw last year specifically is, I think for the better part of the year, we did require quarantining for close contacts. If somebody had to quarantine for the 10 days, they're half of what the number is to be chronically absent. So 10% of the year is 17 days, 10-day isolation, you're almost there, one. And the other thing we are seeing, I guess this is good or bad, parents are keeping their kids, we're telling them to keep them home if they're sick, and they are. The one thing that is being discussed at ISB is maybe revisiting how absenteeism is calculated, because if kids are gone and they're still doing the work for whatever the reason is, should they be really marked absent? Is there some type of blended present code that they could use? And lastly, I do anticipate in the next year or two, the state is probably going to redo the state assessment contract. I'm not sure they're going to stay with IAR. again, they're going to change. One of the things we've been pushing as a leadership group is the amount of testing that the kids are doing. I fully support accountability. It will always be here, but maybe it doesn't take 50 math problems to figure out if you're proficient in math. Maybe it's 20. We're also looking at trying to encourage them to look at a more adaptive test, very similar to MAP. If the kids get the problems right, the questions get harder. And then getting the data back quicker. We can't use it. By the time we get it, it's pretty much the next year. We've already done our budget requests, our planning. So those are just some of the things that those have been issues even prior to the pandemic. So I think the team, I will tell you the charts that you saw up here at the end that Ms. Harrisman put together, I don't know any other district that has that level of granularity and can understand how the formula they use to come up with the index scores. And I'm not like a math person, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure things out, and I think I gave up on that one like 3 years ago, and Eileen figured it out. She's been a tremendous asset in that area. So again, just wanted to button it up. It's a lot of information. We're happy to answer any questions.
So I do have a couple questions with a few. First, starting with the AP classes, how the test, they have to apply in October now versus March. What are we doing to help our students to kind of prepare for that? Because it is a big financial investment for our students to decide if they want to take that. Usually when kids are taking that AP class, I know, speaking from experience with my children, because they want to get that college credit and reduce some of that load in college. But if they have to decide by October versus March, that's a huge decrease in that window of opportunity for them and their families to decide if they're going to do that.
Yeah, so a lot of that comes from the teacher themselves. A lot of our teachers have been teaching these classes for years, trying to identify with the students early on what their skills are, what they may need to do, what that level of effort will be to get to that 3 to 5. We do work pretty diligently to get our kids as many discounts as possible based on their economic situation, and we continue to explore ways to try to reduce the price. But really it comes down to that teacher to student interaction and helping to guide that. And, we do AP score breakdowns. We get those scores usually in July. And so we are looking at those performance levels and then having conversations based on the course on what our performance levels are and trying to address that, see if there's holes in our curriculum and how we can better identify those students. But really, most of it comes down to that interaction with the teacher and the student.
Okay. The next one I was in here is building here it is. Working to provide support for students through a more robust MTSS process. So I know we've had these, it seems like this conversation keeps coming up for some reason. With moving to that new platform, when do we see something being built out for that you could report back to the board?
I'm going to have Dr. Stefan come to the microphone to handle that. She does the more day-to-day interaction with that program.
For sure. I love it. I just wanted to make sure you repeated the question, make sure I got it. So reporting out on MTSS, definitely I'm hoping actually Dr. Center was having us as a teaching learning department look through when we can do some board presentations specifically around teaching and learning. And we're starting with Kurt today. So MTSS, if I remember correctly on our calendar, I believe we were looking at April. I might have that off, but for sure in the spring there will be a presentation specific around MTSS.
That's great, thank you. And then last question, I mean, obviously it's obvious in this data there with COVID, it's had an effect on our students. And I know we have multi-tiered systems in place with MTSS and everything. And we have the gold program here at the high school. And I know over COVID, we implemented the Twilight tutoring. Is that still being utilized by our students and families? Because I think that's a great thing to have. I wish Oh, she's coming back. I wish we would have had that, even earlier, but, there's some positives that have come out.
Yes, we still have Twilight tutoring in place. I'm going to have Katie jump up. She is responsible for the Twilight tutoring program, so she can speak in detail to like the number of teachers we have tutoring, at what different levels they are, and then kind of a little more detail on how that's working.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, again, because it was being kind of pushed out through social media and in the schools. I've seen there's kind of been a lull, and, I think families are, I don't want to say forgetting, but it's like, because it's still a fairly new resource for students and families that if we don't do that reminder, like, oh yeah, we have that.
Yeah, so we currently have about 36 tutors across the K-12 arena. Most of them are currently between the middle school and high school, and we do have tutors at every subject area. At the high school, I believe there's only one at English. But we are continuing to push it out. It is on the Canvas page at every level for every building to make it super easy. A lot of teachers in their homeroom have the QR codes set up so students can just use their iPads and scan it to sign up through Calendly. I think around some of the boards here at the high school, they've been working on including it as well. So we are trying to continue to do in the buildings, supporting students. And I know in different meetings that building admin have with parents, they remind them that they've been having it. It was talked about a lot during parent-teacher conferences, reminding parents like, hey, if your student needs extra help, here's a great resources, and showing them how to get and access that Twilight tutoring.
We've also expanded the hours, right? So we used to only do it Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at night. We also have weekend hours now too.
Oh, that's great. But what about for parents? Because sometimes students need a reminder or a push from their parents, like, hey, I see there's this tutoring, why are we not doing it? Is it available like when I log on to Infinite Campus so that I as a parent might know?
It's currently available if you log into Canvas. So if you are an observer on any of our Canvas courses, so if your student's in Canvas, which all of our students are, and any parents as an observer, they're able to see it right there on the Canvas course, and it's also available on all of the building Canvas courses as one of like the help center buttons that teachers can access, or that parents can access.
Okay.
What I'm thinking though is maybe we just send like a narrative reminder in one of the newsletters, like with a link in there to like the explanation, Katie, that you just gave. Maybe if one of you could talk to Heather, she could actually put it in the district newsletter. We could send it out.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say we can loop in Heather and her team as well to just push more through social media. Because I'm on all the social media pages and I agree, and I haven't seen it as much. So that's definitely something we can connect with Heather to push that more through social media as another tool for parents. Because I know not every parent is on Canvas, so it's a good plan.
Yeah, it just that reminder, because it's still a fairly new tool, and as we're, again, this semester is coming to a close. And we're starting a new one, just making sure our students have the best footing possible.
And I do want to identify real quick that the high school has kind of revamped the way they provide tutoring in the building. So every period, students are able to find content area experts in different areas of the building. So now our teachers that are on supervision, and this was something we worked out with our partners at Earl, or in Earl, but instead of just watching the cafeteria or just watching some of the collaboration spaces in the new part of the wing, those students are now engaging in tutoring every period. So students are able to find help every period of the day, every subject that we have. And that's something that the high school administration has worked to make available for all our kids.
Not every subject, every period.
Should be every core subject, every period, but I can double check with Mr. Nicholas and see if we have a hole somewhere.
Math isn't available first hour.
That is because, that's because they're in collaboration. So I apologize. When they are in collaboration, we don't have somebody available. You catching me on that one.
That's okay. It's just, it's okay. She goes fourth hour.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I have a question. And I hope I don't meander too much on this, but kind of hear me out here. On the ninth grade on track slide. Coming out of the pandemic, obviously we see the numbers drop. Do you guys have any idea if they're anything specific to us or whatever? Because the state numbers are still kind of at those Mendoza lines, and even our 4-year on track didn't drop as much as that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we've actually had quite a bit of conversation about that. 2 years ago, when we had the number in the 40s, it's important to note that that was the year that we did not have any students come in, right? So all of our students were starting high school, and that wasn't the case around the state. There were places that were in, there were places that were, maybe a little more aggressive with that. We were out longer, and so we think that that probably had a significant impact. And then as we came into last year's number, one of the things we attributed to, we have a very robust 8th to 9th grade transition process. And we were still in a lot of COVID restrictions when last year's freshmen were 8th graders getting ready to make that jump. So we didn't have as much opportunity for our counselors to get in and visit. We didn't have the Panther Crew students going over to the middle schools. And so, that seems to be, at least in our mind, initially one of those things that when you look at our systems over time, that was the breakdown in that system. But we are kind of redoubling efforts. That's Mr. Peterson. That is one of his focus points. It's been one of his focus points this is interview. So I do anticipate that number to go up.
Mr. DeVere, I would say it's even more pronounced probably than Dr. Rowling is saying. In 2021, 90% of the districts in Illinois came back for live instruction before we did. 90%. So do the math, there's 840 districts. We came back later, and I'm just going to say this, I'm not sure how much attention was being paid to that metric, but I'm very, very confident that it's being paid. There is attention paid to it now.
Now, are those part of the 4-year graduation rate slide then too, or because if that's the case, then they've obviously made that up, or is that separate?
No, those students, so when you look at that like that 40%, those students are now juniors. But as I talked earlier, our counselors have been very diligent about getting kids into summer school, getting students into credit recovery, and getting students that are significantly behind into our gold program.
And once the freshman on track is a little bit different in the sense that they will not, if you recover those credits in summer school, you don't get credit for it. Whereas the high school graduation rate, they give you, I think, till August before the final calculation is done. So if you end the year, let's say it's May 29th, and the student's able to recover the credit a week later in summer school, it doesn't count. It's literally when the end of the year hits, that's where the line is drawn.
The state also reduced graduation requirements for those 2 years, remember? So like during
right,
COVID year, they reduced the number of credits were required, and the freshmen and whatever, they still have the same number of credits to earn.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you. I was confused a little bit there, but thanks.
You would think to see the same trend line. I completely forgot about that. Was that for 2 years?
Dr. Mendez, do we have the ability to reach out to any of the districts that stayed as long as we did, or at least somewhat close, and try and compare numbers so that we could at least get a feel for our situation?
Yeah, I mean, I know who they are. I won't call them out here. I think we probably trend the same way, but I know who the districts are in Lake County that kind of mirror us. So yeah, I can get that.
Well, with that being said too, I think, state average, because like you just said, it ranges, there's a wide range. Rural districts went back earlier. There's some, are more concentrated, less student, blah, blah, blah. Could we possibly get maybe state in Lake County or something like that, just to have some kind of comparison,
Yeah, I can work on finding some like districts and some regional comparisons to bring back.
Yeah, I have a question actually, and Annette actually made me think about it, and it was around the promotion of AP, and some of the barriers or hesitation around AP could potentially be cost when it's time to sign up. Few questions. What percentage of students typically achieve credits or achieve class credit after AP?
Hold on, let me get back to that slide. I mean, if I was to guess, we since they've made that change, we're cruising at about 55 to 60, maybe even a little bit lower.
Now, is that 55 to 60% taking the test or 55 to 60% gaining college credit?
I interpreted the question as number of students taking the test that earned a score that would get credit. I'm not sure exactly who gets the credit, because if you go to Illinois State, you have a 3 through 5, you will get the credit. If you go to a private institution or you go out of state, that's not always guaranteed. Sometimes they will just let you out of a class, but not necessarily give you that credit. But in terms of our pass rate, right now it's floating somewhere around 50% since they've made that change.
And you have to remember, passing is very test dependent, right? So, like if you're taking AP Physics, nationally, low test pass rate, right? Versus, I'm trying to think, AP Psych, right, has a very high pass rate. So it's a little bit hard sometimes because it could be so dependent on the specific test that they're taking.
So here's my angle. If cost is a barrier, credit is the goal, then should we actually direct much of our energy in the dual credit, not necessarily in the AP?
I don't know if you can see the smile on Dr. Center's face. We have, yes. The answer to that question is we do believe that increasing dual credit is a better option for many of our kids. There are barriers to dual credit that you don't necessarily see with AP. So AP, essentially any teacher can do it if they go to, a day or two training. To get dual credit, teachers have to meet education requirements. They have to have a master's degree in their content. Currently, we have the ability to work with College of Lake County to have teachers who have a master's degree and then a certain number of graduate credits in their content beyond a provisional. So we're having a lot of conversations with CLC. We're working on moving forward with increasing dual credit that we host here at Round Lake High School, but we want to do so in a purposeful way. We don't want to do what I usually refer to as like random acts of dual, where a kid just like, hey, here's a class you can take. We want to tie it to some general education requirements and to career pathways. So that's part of our CBE plan that we've been working on. So again, the smile on Dr. Center's face kind of tells you where we are on that.
And I think ideally we love kids to be able to graduate from here with their associates. I mean, that's in the end, that's kind of what we, an option. But what Dr. Rowling isn't saying, well, he's saying it indirectly, is part of the problem is the disconnect between the community college institutions and like the public schools. There's a politicalness to it. And, if as I view it, if we're teaching to the same standards, we're using the college curriculum, we're using their assessments. I mean, what's the issue? It becomes a certification issue. So that's something that I think there's been some headway made at the state level. It is more accessible. It's something we're going to explore, but it's not been fun.
But also I want to say, we've worked with HR and Earl, right, to look at how we reimburse tuition for advanced degrees. And so one of the things that we haven't, in the past, we only did master's degrees in educational leadership was what was reimbursed and other things weren't. So now we've changed that model, right? So between the HR and then us and Earl, we've come to a different arrangement, which allows us now to help teachers get those advanced degrees in those content areas, which will open up more lanes for dual credit.
I'm just thinking what a sweet way, kind of a power move to really support the families. Anyway.
Could not agree more.
And I agree. I would love if we could do more of the dual credit, because I think, and I know we've talked about this, because when my son went off to college, when we did freshman orientation, there was a girl coming in from high school with her associates, with her high school diploma. And so she started in the education program as a junior in college, and she was only 17.
So there's dual credit and dual enrollment. Usually we'd have to work on the dual enrollment piece to get to the associates, but that's definitely on the path, right? So when we look at what do we want our students to be able to do, Because we're even looking at, through our competency-based ed programming, is moving the acquisition of high school credits into 8th grade, right, as potential. So I can earn Math 1, I can earn English 1. It's the same, it's actually kind of like AP, but for 8th graders, right? Or dual credit for 8th graders, so that allows them to use our high school curriculum and then earn those credits. And we're expanding that even to potentially elective credits, like an art class or something, which allows students to move more through that credit acquisition in high school, which then could allow them to dual enroll as they get older, right? So that's the plan moving forward of some of the things that we're trying to do, and in order to give our students more opportunity.
Right.
Because there's no way to get your associates through AP.
No.
Just college credit.
No, CLC will accept some of that, and I'm working. Dr. Stefan and I meet with CLC monthly on dual credit ventures, and then I'm working on a separate team. CLC is kind of dipping their toe into the dual enrollment, and so I'm working with a handful of school districts that are discussing what that might look like. But again, sometimes the wheels of post-secondary institutions move a little slower than we like to here in Round Lake. So I'm not promising anything for the spring, but we are working on it. It is one of our major focus areas.
So I hear early winter.
Probably coming back sometime in February.
Any additional conversation?
So we will be bringing maybe a significantly more abbreviated version once we get the most updated map results. It might be in a weekly or something in the spring, but we want to show you the progress then too. So
Thank you very much. All right, next up, I think Dr. Mendoza has the kindergarten student return from Plebiac school configuration update.
yeah, so I have 3 of Ms. Bennett's items. In your packet, you have some very similar backup information that you've seen before. In the middle section with the, of the memo, I just want to highlight some changes. We are done with the first round of staff meetings. We're finalizing the Q&A doc for the staff this week, and we're going to release that prior to the winter break. The district administration and Earl met to formulate a plan for staff moves for either model. One of the things we shared with the board is one of the big rocks was in either model, how do we decide where teachers go? That process has been solidified. The information was shared last week with the staff, and a follow-up Google form was provided in case there are any additional questions, and there are, so we're getting questions related to the staff move procedure. I want to commend the team and their leadership for working collaboratively on that. The initial parent meeting with PAC and BPAC will be tomorrow and Wednesday. 10 separate parent meetings will be held in January. I repeat, 10, to share details of the models. The team will collect feedback and answer questions. Parents will also have the option to submit feedback and questions via a Google form. In addition to that, follow-up videos and communications will be prepared to share with parents who aren't able to attend any of the sessions. The communication regarding parent sessions will be sent to families tomorrow morning. So those are the updates. I'm happy to answer any additional questions at this time regarding that board item.
Looks like we have no questions there. Thank you for that very thorough discussion. All right, next up on our order here is disposal of materials. Any questions for Dr. Rowling in regards to what he's throwing away this month? Hearing none, thank you very much. Next up is the strategic plan monthly report. Anything to call out, Dr. Mendoza?
Yes, this is a living, breathing document, and if Ms. Bennett was here, she'd be sharing this with you. We did add information connected to the partner school versus traditional school model within the strategic plan document. Theme D, goals 1 and 3, and theme F, securing the future, goal 5. So we added that. So we will continue to update the strategic planning document with some of those updates as the year progresses. That's the only formal update.
Any questions for the administration for Dr. Mendoza? Hearing none, next up we'll go to just a quick look over. We've got the FOIA report. Any questions from the board as to what we saw on the FOIA request? Everything looks pretty straightforward to me. Hearing none there. Next up is review contracts less than 1,000. I believe we did not have any, if that is correct. That's exactly the way I thought of it as well, so we will move on then. So next up is public comment. As always, members of the public may participate in public comment during regular board meetings by attending in person or by submitting an electronic public comment form. Please note that speakers are limited to 3 minutes of time. Electronic public comments are accepted up until noon on the day of the regularly scheduled meeting. We did not have any electronic public comments submitted for this meeting. In addition, we don't have anybody in the room, so don't know. I'll go ahead and throw out there. Would anyone that's not here like to have public comment? Hearing none, we will now move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Mendoza, take it away.
I'm struggling here a little bit. I've got my notes from Heather's items, and so just give me one quick second here. All right, here we go. So we're grateful to announce that the state superintendent, Dr. Carmen Ayala, and the Illinois State Board of Ed's Policy and Communications Officer, Irna Snopek, will be visiting our district tomorrow morning, actually. The focus of the tour will be the Early Education Center or Birth to Five programming. We look forward to highlighting the great things happening in the district, as well as the ongoing need to expand preschool services for our community. It's a little bit strategic with that, given we've submitted the capital, Early Childhood Capital Grant. So I think it's really important that we'll be able to highlight that. And really, they reached out to us and asked for the visit, so we're really grateful for that. Last week, the Honor Civics Community Course celebrated the end of their semester with the partners who assisted in their projects. The group leading the continuation of Be the Spark Enrichment Program was surprised with donations of nearly $30,000. Donors included the Gorder Family Foundation, $15,000, Earl, $4,500, the Illinois Education Association, $2,823, Round Lake Area District 116, $7,500. These funds will be utilized to fund enrichment opportunities for Round Lake Area 116 youth. We will send a special thanks to the District 116 Education Foundation and congratulations to the following Foundation Grant Award recipients. Kyle Glinski from Beach, physical education activities, the Amazing Team Games and an Omnikin Ball, $464. Trina Metz, principal of Beach, We Love to Be Fit and Work Together, $1,000. Katrina Cook from Alice and LED Powered Art, $600. Lastly, but certainly not least, below is a list of donations recently made to Round Lake area schools. The Daisy Foundation in Meyer, $2,500 to Beach Elementary, and the Round Lake area Beach Police Department, 5 winter jackets donated to Beach Elementary. That concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. Any questions in regards to the superintendent's report? Hearing none, we will move to committee reports and our finance committee.
Thank you. Yes, Finance met earlier this evening. There are a few agenda items that are in our board packet for later. That includes the 2023 spring musical contract, so I'll speak to that when that comes on the agenda. Hanover Research Service Agreement request, that again is also on our agenda for later. Next on the agenda we had is the ComEd 2022 Electrical Vehicles for Education program. This was something, I was visiting DeKalb and they were awarded a electric car for their driver's ed program. And I spoke with Dr. Mendoza and thought, why not Round Lake, as always? The application is really as simple as applying. You receive an electric car and the charging station, everything that's needed for the car. Prerequisites, as Dr. Kibbins mentioned in the finances, you have to be a ComEd customer. We are, and being the agency that we are. So obviously we meet the criteria. One of the other requirements, if we are awarded the car, is changing our curriculum and incorporating education on electric cars in driver's ed. Again, I'm not a curriculum expert, but it seems fairly easy enough. So hopefully, we'll see the application deadline is the end of this year, which is weeks away. So hopefully, we'll know soon. But a free car. Next is, well, we've already had is the tax levy. We had that hearing. And then again, Dr. Kibbens has talked about the budget assumptions. Next is Power School Staff Performance Evaluation Contract. This is from the request from HR, Mrs. Belliciotis and Dr. Lamping. Currently, the platform and program we use now, that company has acquired another company and has a better platform. So it is sticking with the same company. It's just upgrading to the new platform that they have, which is better, has a better turnaround time with agreements, and it gives our HR department, specifically Mrs. Belliciotis, the ability to make changes without having to put in a ticket with their SLA service level agreements and getting back to those tickets. And the example she spoke to in the finance committee meeting, it's taking them 2 months to get to those. With her having that ability, it will obviously be better for HR for evaluations. Skyward migration to cumulative. If you remember back prior to the pandemic, when we were going to Infinite Campus, we talked about taking Infinite Campus and it being a holistic approach, taking our business and HR and education components. We only wound up, obviously we didn't do the HR and business because, well, Infinite Campus wound up they don't even offer it anymore. So we've stuck with Skyward. And we were going to upgrade that platform, and then Dr. Kibbens came. So we didn't want to do that change then because we wanted her to get familiar with the business office and the protocols here. Then we had the pandemic. So then again, we didn't do it. So now that we are today, we do need and want to get that done. So that request will be coming forward in the next board meeting. We do want to get that completed. It is about a 6-month migration. And again, it'll give us a better platform. It'll move from the legacy Skyward to the cumulative. And again, this hosted platform will give us additional securities that are needed. Next on the agenda is an investment strategy request. As we know, Dr. Kibbens has done a great job in taking our money and making it work for us. And she has come forward with as she finds opportunities. And currently the market, while not great for us as consumers, has been great for the district to make investments. And Dr. Kibbens brings those forward as needed. However, it changes and is moving rapidly. And sometimes our board meetings don't fall in line with her wanting to make those transactions. So she's brought forward, her and Dr. Lamping, a request where we would give her some parameters where she can invest and do those opportunities, given her the direction of the board. In discussions with finance committee and again, looking at budget, making sure that we have money for today, tomorrow, and what if. And again, we have the plebeiat children, moving them back into the district. As you know, we've done some smaller, not really small, $5 million is not small, so some investments. We have the $5 million that we have invested that comes back to us at the end of the month, yielding us well over $60,000 of investment. And then we did a 49-day one. Again, that'll yield us $29,000. So Dr. Kibbens is looking for the opportunity for us to give her the direction. And in discussion, what amount would that be? So in finance, we have agreed $7.5 million. Again, we have that $5 million that will come back at the end of the month, December 31st. That opportunity will then expire, again, yielding us that $60,000. And then we have other monies that are coming back. So we are comfortable in what we discussed in finance, giving her the authority to invest $7.5 million. Now, it could be all that, or it could be a bunch of little investments, giving her a 6-window opportunity to invest, and only invest that up to a year, because we don't want to tie that up more than a year. But she's looking at smaller short-term investments, and we feel comfortable giving her that. Any questions on that specifically? Because maybe you're thinking, Scott. I can see you.
No, well, I'm just thinking about the way it is structured is required to have a certain sort of dependability on the investments. In other words, it's not NFTs and cryptos, I'm assuming.
Yes, of course. Right, with the Super Bowl coming up, that kind of thing. No trips to Vegas, no betting on the Cubs or the Bears, that kind of thing. Yes, it is the parameters we've discussed and the amount. So yes, there's, not that I think Dr. Kimmons is leaving for Vegas anytime soon, but yeah.
Per dime.
Of course, I meant on the districts, yes. Yes, very specific, because I know when, approached about the idea, having the history with the district, as you know, very tight with the purse strings, and they don't like to give a lot of leeway. But, yeah, yes, it's a great question. It's a great question. So that will be coming in the January board meeting as well, with those parameters for board approval and consideration. And that was our agenda. Again, always please feel free to review the treasurer's report. Again, I did mention it in the finance committee meeting, and as you heard Dr. Kibbins spoke to, and even in the budget assumptions, the investments that she's making our money work, and as Mr. DeVera put, really leaving, making sure there's no money left on the table. We're really making our money work for us. So it is appreciated. And that's it for finance.
Any questions for the Finance Committee? Hearing none, we will move to some approvals.
Need a motion to approve the December 5th, 2022 regular board meeting minutes.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Ms. Lee, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Mr. DeVera,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the consent agenda for the accounts payable report for $1,149,746.63. The previous motions report for $68,520.35. November 2022 treasurer's report, the November 2022 P-card report, the December 19th, 2022 employment report.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. DeVera, seconded by Ms. Larson. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Mr. DeVera,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the decrease in personal inventory of 1.0 FTE district parent liaison and 1.0 FTE school translator, and the increase in personal inventory to 2.0 FTE community outreach and engagement specialist.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Jewett, seconded by Ms. Lee. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. DeVera,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the 2022 tax levy, which is in compliance with the Truth in Taxation Act requirements.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Francisco, seconded by Mrs. Klingler. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. DeVera,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Motion carries.
New business, I need a motion to approve the contract with Broadway Licensing for the RLHS Spring Musical Emma.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Tavera, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Roll call, please.
Mr. Tavera, Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes. Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the approval of a 3-year service agreement with a 68-day out clause with Hanover Research in the amount of $49,500 per year using ESSER funds in year 1.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Dr. Mendoza?
Yeah, this is, I just want to give the full board a little bit of background on this. I've got a lot of detailed information in the packet. This is something that I actually personally brought to finance in the board. Hanover is a consulting firm. They have nationwide reach. I've been in dialogue with them for about 4 or 5 years, but typically with any consultant or vendor, I slow roll it, and it got really slow when the pandemic hit. Coming out of the pandemic, I think we all feel like there's a need to be agile and to be able to respond to conditions on the ground. The service they provide is very, very unique. The biggest benefit is that we as a district are able to generate an essential question. It could be, how do we increase parent engagement? How do we improve student attendance? How do we improve reading outcomes? I mean, it could be anything. They've access to 200 researchers nationwide. They have access to people with PhDs in math and statistics, PhDs in economic and educational policy, statisticians, psychometricians, and basically they take this essential question and generate an executive summary for us. I've included a sample of what that looks like in the packet, and then they also have access to what I call exemplar districts. So, for example, if we're interested in improving staff morale and climate, or we're interested in parent engagement, they can actually go find districts that look like we do that are having positive outcomes. And so in the end, what they do is provide us with a comprehensive executive summary, which could either reaffirm that we're incorporating the right strategies. It may say, yeah, you're implementing the right strategies, but you may want to implement these several. And oh, by the way, here are districts that are doing this successfully. And then it kind of helps us inform our decisions. I personally spoke with 3 superintendents of districts that I've listed. There are more. I could have listed more. One of the districts I spoke to has had a partnership with them for over 8 years and used Hanover to improve their high school academy program. I spoke with another district that worked with Hanover. I think they had a 3-year relationship on staff climate and culture. That's a big one right now. And then one of the other ones is currently doing equity work with Hanover. They have been a partner with them for 6 years. So as you look at the manpower it takes to pull something like this together, I certainly think we have a talented group of administrators in our district. But what it does do in 6 weeks, we're able to get this comprehensive summary. Over the course of the year, they can complete roughly 6 of these projects. And I intend to use all 6. The first one is going to be focused on targeted increase in parent engagement in our schools. And at the end, based upon our satisfaction levels, I want to thank Dr. Sender for finding money to support this. If we felt like it was worthwhile to continue the partnership, I would then bring it back as a budget assumption based upon the value that we thought we were getting, and we would fund it locally. If you think of the cost and look at the project scope, this basically costs us a little more than half a teacher. There's no way we could conduct this type of work even if we added a full-time person. There's just no way. So I've done the due diligence. I've presented multiple times with the finance chair, Ms. McGinley, and then subsequently presented in finance. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but there's a lot more detail in the packet if you're interested.
And I'll just share, because I did have a lot of questions. I know for those of us that, come from the corporate world, when we hear them bringing in a consultant, your eye twitches and the hair on your neck stands up. So it's a little different, obviously, in this environment and bringing in a consultant. And Dr. Mendoza, walked and talked us through that. Did right away was a concern is having us sign a 3-year contract. So we never want to do a multi-year with someone new, because if it's not something we want to continue even after year 1. But we do have an out clause, so that is built in. Because should we find if after this year, maybe it isn't beneficial, we sure don't want to be locked in for 3 years. And also reading the literature, because they said they would send somebody out to work with the team directly. Again, sometimes with consultants, there's some hidden costs. So then I wanted to make sure we didn't get billed back for their travel or their time in person in the district, and we wouldn't. It is part of the contracts. So that was another question that was asked. And then again, just hearing from, districts who do have a relationship with them, and not just districts that maybe are in that honeymoon period with them where everything seems great. And as you heard Dr. Mendoza speak, he's talked to districts that have had, some relative length in working with them. But Dr. Mendoza will report back on what we find, and to stewardship. And it does seem like, it definitely is a library and host of information that would be valuable to this team.
Yeah, and I'm in conversation with Dr. Mendoza in regards to it anytime, much like Mrs. Grady McGinley, when you start talking about consultants from the corporate world, I lose my brain because we're paying for the same thing that we get from in-house people. But this one has the added benefit of having a much wider scope, a much quicker turnaround, and keeping in fact that we have our dedicated staff doing their own data assumptions. This allows us to expand and to be able to grow on it.
And I will say, and Dr. Center knows where I'm going with this, when I first started in the district, we would bring in, we had, school improvement money, you remember this, and we experienced some of what you both experienced. We feel like we know our district, the strategies we employ are grounded in research, so they really wouldn't be coming in to tell us what to do or how to do it. They're collecting the information, they're telling us what's worked in exemplar school districts, then we get to decide. So they wouldn't be necessarily, and I'm not saying anybody's implying this, they wouldn't be coming in here kind of directing us on what we should or should not do. They're giving us the information, they're collecting the research for us, they're presenting it in an easy to understand way. And then the other thing we have access to is through this partnership is I think we get 25 licenses for their national research library. My intention would be to give that to the principals, the executive leadership team, and anyone else on the instructional side that Dr. Center deems appropriate. And then we could actually have access to the other studies they've done nationwide, and I think we'll be able to use some of the information to just get better. That's all this is about.
I must say I've dealt with Hanover actually, and they have a good reputation just through my business.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Klinkler?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Tavera,
Yes. Motion carries.
I need a motion to approve the master service agreement with Cohort Hamilton Associates Incorporated.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett.
If I could just
Please.
provide some context, this is something the Finance Committee reported back out around October, November. This is an agreement with an engineering group that we would have in-house, similar to like as we've asked for our architect. This is for projects that we do in-house where we don't want to utilize our architect's engineers, so these are specific to us, specifically using them for the concrete pavement project that we have or will have this spring with Murphy. So again, there are projects that we can handle in-house where we don't need or want to go to our architect and use them or their engineering firm. And we would, of course, cutting out that middleman and just having them on staff for the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Tavera,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, next up is first reading of board policy. Did everyone get a chance to review? Does anyone have any questions that they want to pull out in regards to the first reading? Any clarifications you'd like to ask from the administration? Dr. Mendoza, anything you want to add?
No, just pretty straightforward. According to Ms. Bennett, nothing unusual. We have our identified department heads reviewing these to ensure that we're in compliance, and hopefully we get these approved at the January meeting.
And as a reminder, this will come back for a second reading at the January meeting, at which point we will do a vote at that point to approve them. Hearing no questions on that, we will move to positive occurrences.
Well, I'll share, it was the first cheer comp, so our JV team took second place. So that's exciting. Next cheer comp is January 7th. I think it's at Lakes High School, if anyone's interested. And then I just wanted to expand about the breakfast that Dr. Mendoza talked about for the civics honors class. I did get to attend. I actually got to work with Anthony, who is the student honored here today. He really is an outstanding young man. He interviewed me for his project, and excited to see the final results of that. But the civics honors class that Mr. Barnshaw has with that group of students is really a remarkable group, and it really is a great class. And appreciate being part of it.
I'll go. It's been a week or so. I can't write. My dates are all mixed up, but the Winter Spectacular that most of us got to attend was the first one that was back to normal since COVID, and it was so great to see the kids performing and to see administrators and our superintendent and our former superintendent and alumni. So many people come back for that. It's such a beloved program, and the students did such an amazing job, and the whole fine arts department did such an amazing job. It was fabulous, and a shout out to Organic Life for the help that they provided, and the hot cocoa and all the fixins that went along with that, and the volunteers that were there.
Yeah, that was amazing. I have to agree with that. I was trying to remember if that was since the last time we had our meeting, because that's how it's been this month. But yeah, it was such a beautiful experience. And then the middle schools also had their performances as well. So I got to see Round Lake Middle School's performance. They had some of the high school band and choir come and join them. So it was just kind of a lovely experience. They had so many people that they just kept having to add chairs, and it was nice to see, our teachers and parents again, everybody gathered together. It was like,
hot as usual, and it was just fun and hearing the kids sing and doing their Christmas music. But they actually were very inclusive. They had a couple of Hanukkah songs, which I thought was really neat. And I don't remember if they did that before, but I thought it was cool that they did that. And I just thought it was just a great time. They did a great job. So.
And to piggyback on that, I was able to attend the McGee Middle School concert, which was at the same time. And absolutely a great show put on there. Again, the same kind of format. Had some of the high school kids coming in and helping to perform during it. Great turnout by the families. Great show. Winter Spectacular was every bit the spectacular that it should be. 3 really full houses, which was awesome to see. Great to see the community turning out. I've been at freshman wrestling, seems like every other day. So, we heard a lot about that. Coach Schustef talked about our great wrestlers and the great wrestling program that we've got going and growing here. And it's just amazing to watch everyone.
So I've got two. I've got one to piggyback on Annette's with the civic class. I got to participate last Thursday in the morning and was interviewed, and then got to see the Cornerstone projects. I thought that was really cool. One of the ones that stuck out was the improving police relationships with the students. And I thought it was really neat how they did that. And one of the pieces where they would have police come in, and then the social studies classes it was the Friday before Thanksgiving, and the social studies classes could come in and basically have a conversation with the officers. And I thought, what a really cool way to use that forum and to leverage those relationships. And so that was great. It seemed like feedback was very successful. And then right after that, ended up being late to a community meeting with the Round Lake Best meeting. And Mr. Olson the choir was there. They were waiting for the bus. And so I walked in and I'm like, oh, I missed it. And because they were singing at that meeting, because it was like a holiday party, I got a private. I got some. He said, "Would you like us to sing some?" I'm like, "Heck yeah!" And so they did. So me and another person that had been late, because of the same reason, we both got our own private. And so what it reminded me of, my oldest went to college and not for music, but she would perform, and Elizabeth's group. What would happen at the end of the Christmas concert is they would do Silent Night, and they would align around the auditorium, and you could just feel same. And so it just brought me back there, and I'm still buzzing. So it was fantastic. Top that.
Hearing no more positive occurrences for this round, we'll move on. Anyone have any future agenda items they'd like to place out for the administration to address? Hearing none?
Actually, I'm not sure if this is a future agenda item, but is CLC the only only college we have to play with on the dual credit?
Yeah, so Illinois recently passed some legislation related to dual credit, and one of the stipulations is you have to go to your local community college first. If they can't work with you on a course or are unwilling to, then you have to go to other. You have to send it to the I forget the name of the organization, but it's essentially the Illinois Community College Association. If they won't work with you, then you can go to other providers. But I will say, my short time here, CLC's tune has changed significantly. So I feel like the new president and the new leadership related to high school outreach are much more willing to work with us. And I think it's really just more of a matter of making sure we have a system like I said, we want to do this, with purpose, and then getting the right staff in place. So I'm optimistic that, I think we prefer to work with them because that's where our kids go, and I think they've come around to working with us. So it should be, in the next year or so that we start to see some movement in that direction.
And I would think logistically for our students, because CLC is close. Not that there isn't MCC or Elgin, it's just logistically. Yeah,
The
Harbor.
internet has opened up a vast array of different options.
That's
So
true,
I'm
yes.
just working the angles.
That's a good
So-
question.
All right, hearing nothing else on the future agenda items, then we will take a motion to convene in closed session as permitted by statute 5 ILCS 120/2 for the purpose of discussing the following: employment matters 5 ILCS 120/2C1, litigation 5 ILCS 120/2C11, real estate matters 5 ILCS 120/2C5, and closed meeting minutes 5 ILCS 120/2C21.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Lee, seconded by, I'm going to give it to Mr. DeVera. Roll call, please.
Mr. DeVera,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will reconvene in closed session, which will bring to close our final meeting of 2022. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing everyone again at our next open meeting on January 9th, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you all, and have a great evening.